Welcome to the Line Life podcast. I'm Jeff Postlethwaite of T&D World, and today we're bringing you more stories of the grit, courage, and inspirational teamwork that it takes to be a line worker.
Thank you for tuning in to the T&D World Line Life podcast, produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. My name is Amy Fischbach, and I'm the field editor for T&D World and also the host of the Line Life podcast. Before I dive into today's episode, I invite you to become part of our Line Life podcast community by searching for the Line Life podcast in your favorite podcasting app or going to linelife.podbean.com and clicking follow in the top right. We air interview-style episodes on the first and third Fridays of each month, and also audio stories in our In Case You Missed It series featuring articles that appeared in our print magazine on the second and fourth Fridays of each month. If you have a comment on this episode or a suggestion for a future guest, please reach out to me. You can email me at amyfischbach@gmail.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Instagram at Lineman World. I'd love to hear from you. Now let's move on to today's episode. For this episode, we are shining the spotlight on the Hurricane Helene response. A while ago, we featured the episode Hurricane Helene Voices from the Field. And on our show today, we have three new guests who are all journeyman line workers for Duke Energy and responded to the hurricane. This trio was also a journeyman team from Duke Energy who placed fourth at the 2025 International Lineman's Rodeo. And after having to miss last year's competition during the hurricane response, it was wonderful to see these three crossing the stage to win their award. Today, our guests for the Line Life podcast are journeyman linemen Miles Bell, Jordan Henderson, and Heath Burrell. This will be a two-part series. In the first part, they'll talk about how they got into the line trade and their jobs at Duke Energy, as well as the logistics for the storm. And then in the second part, they'll dive more into the damage and destruction caused by Hurricane Helene and how they were able to get the lights on for the communities. Also, to learn more about them, make sure you check out an article about the teams at the International Lineman Rodeo in the T&D World magazine, and also part 2 of the Hurricane Helene 1 year later feature, which will be in the print magazine and also online at tdworld.com. Now let's listen in on the conversation that I had with Miles, Jordan, and Heath. Miles, Jordan, and Heath, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for the Line Life podcast. To begin, can the three of you talk about your career so far in the line trade and what inspired you to go into line work?
Yeah, so this will be my 11th year in the trade, and really what inspired me was just finding a career that I could work outside, work with my hands, and I had some friends that were already linemen, and they kind of shared it with me, and then I started applying and ended up at Duke Energy.
My name's Heath Burrell. I've been in this trade for roughly 20 years. They call me the old guy here. I started as a contractor in 2005 when I got out of high school, and I worked there till 2016 before I got on with Duke Energy. And I actually took a new role in 2023 as a contractor oversight, but still here at Duke in Hendersonville.
Hey there's Jordan Henderson. I've been in the trade now for going on 16 years. Just like Heath, I started right out of high school. What got me into the trade was I had an uncle that worked here with Duke, and also my dad had worked as a contractor for a while, so it's I kind of seen it on the backside, as you could say too, was hindsight. I was interested in it before I even knew what a lineman was. I just seen my dad and uncle doing it. I was like, man, that's a pretty cool job. So that's what got me into it, and 16 years later, still hard at it.
Love that. Well, now I'd like to hear a little bit about what a day is like for each of you. Can you talk about what a day in the life is like for you at Duke Energy for you guys?
Yeah, so, typically the days start off pretty redundant. Everyone will meet at their work location. Ops Center is what we call them here at Duke. And we always have a safety message every morning. We stretch together just to get the day started to make sure everybody's loose, try to avoid injuries and that kind of thing as we go and get started. But the main thing is we always start with safety. A lot of times we'll pick a work method or some type of safety rule and go over that as a group just to keep ourselves refreshed and make sure we are, doing the things we need to do so we can go home safely every day. And then after that, we'll typically start loading material, figure out our logistics for the day, where we're going to go, and then go to work.
And then Jordan and Heath, do you want to share a little bit about your work day at Duke Energy?
This is Heath. Mine's similar to what Miles said. I still work pretty tight with our supervisors and our linemen here in Hendersonville. So every morning we come in early. It's more, shoot the bull, how's things going. Then, 6:30 starts. We kind of go over the schedule for the day. The linemen, they're going to get together. They're going to stretch, and they do the work methods thing here. They talk about, bring up different safety issues or whatever they want to discuss, just kind of bringing safety awareness to the crew. And then I kind of getting back in my role, and my day consists of like contractor crew visits, doing audits, quality of construction, just, being hand in hand with the contractors, deal a little bit with customer issues, try to do hand in hand with what we can do to help the customer experience. And that's about how my day goes.
So my day is a little different. For about the past year now, it starts out in the mornings the same. We have our little safety stand-down meeting in the mornings and stretch, and then we get started. But for the past year now, I've been a lead lineman on a service truck. We call it a first responder truck. If we get outages throughout the day or service work throughout the day that's due that day, that's stuff that I'm going around doing. Or if we get a car wreck pole, I'm the first one showing up or something like that. If we hire somebody, like I've got a boy with me now, he's been with me for about 6 weeks. I'm usually the guy they go with. So I get to help train them and show them how we go about the day and our computer work and stuff like that. So my day is a little bit different than theirs is.
Okay, so you're like a troubleman then?
Yep, I'd be like a troubleshooter, first responder. If I can get the lights on in a matter of, an hour or so, then I'll stay and do it myself. If it consists more of that, usually I'll get a crew involved. But yeah, I would say I'm a troubleshooter, trouble man.
And it sounds like you guys all have quite a bit of experience in the line trade. Can you talk about the storms that you worked on that kind of stand out in your mind before you worked on Hurricane Helene? What were some other memorable storms for you during your career?
Honestly, after Helene, that's kind of hard because it was such a daunting task that everything else just doesn't even really seem like a bad storm anymore. But for me, really, I've been on several hurricanes, several ice storms, and a couple tornadoes. I would say the thing that sticks out the most is probably the tornadoes that I've worked, just because of the insane amount of destruction in a small area, and just everything wiped out. And Jordan and I have actually worked on those together. We've worked on a lot of storms together, but then after Helene, all those just seemed like a drop in the bucket, really, because it was that same type of tornado destruction, but across our whole service area. So really, it's hard to compare.
I would say just something that comes to mind other than Helene. Sandy, obviously, I can remember working Hurricane Sandy. But as far as just destruction and just having memories from it that I can recall is a tornado back in, I think it was 2014, that hit around Raleigh. We went and worked, and I've never seen just trees just mowed down like that. It looked like somebody had took a lawnmower and just a mile wide for about 6 miles where that thing had touched down. That was probably the most destruction. Just, it was unbelievable. It was like something you'd see in a movie. I can remember a stop sign sticking through a pine tree, about a 18-inch round pine tree, and the stop sign was stuck through it. Just stuff like that that's stuck in my memory from that tornado in Raleigh.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I hate to keep chiming in on the same storms. As far as Sandy goes, that was probably one of the largest storms that I'd worked. We was up in New Jersey for weeks. And then I also worked a big tornado that come through Alabama. I think it was 2012, but don't hold me to that. But it was like a mile wide, I think, if I remember it correctly. And as far as destruction, that's probably as close as you're going to get to what we see in here. It was just, like Jordan said, mowed over. There was nothing left, and you could get in a bucket, and you could see just a pathway where the tornadoes had went through, and it was just pretty much rebuilt from the ground up.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing those storm memories. And now let's move on to Hurricane Helene. Can each of you talk about how long you were in storm duty following the hurricane and what the conditions were like when you arrived? Also, what kind of damage or destruction did you see where you were working?
So, as far as storm duty, for me it was really probably 3 months. Still today, we are still technical on storm duty on certain jobs. We're still actually cleaning up some stuff. But the initial part was probably about 90 days for me, and the first 31 were straight without a day off. But as far as destruction, I mean, insanity is about the best way to describe it. It was crazy. We literally had to rebuild from the ground up in a lot of places. We had whole lines that were just gone because of the flooding. The roads were completely gone, and our lines were built on the edge of those roads, and they were literally gone. Destruction is, I don't know, it's hard to describe other than it was just gone and we had to start over. And then in some of the areas that weren't as affected by flooding, it was more your typical just trees down, broken poles. We had to go through and just clean it up. But in the flood-torn areas, it was terrible. Just crazy. Hope we never have to relive it or see it again.
Thank you, Miles. And Heath and Jordan, can you talk about your experience restoring and rebuilding after Hurricane Helene?
So mine, being on the contractor side, I was one of the onboarding guys for the Mountain Zone. So before pre-storm, when they were funneling in hundreds or I don't know, could have been thousands of people in, we were trying to onboard them, which is going over, safety. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want everybody being safe. So we spent a day or two before the storm hit, just making sure everybody knew our rules and kind of touching on that. Well, then the day of the storm, I had to go onboard some crews, and it was kind of quiet. So I come into the shop. We were in here a few hours early, just kind of coming up with a game plan. I was headed out to meet some more crews to onboard, and on my way over there, that's when the wind and rain started, and it was early in the morning. I had to be over there about 6, but it looked like lightning consistently, but it was really just wind, lines, poles, everything going down. And got this crew. We had to actually onboard them in the dark. They had the emergency lights on in the hotel, and then once we left there, wind got so bad we had to just stop. My boss advised us, let's hold off. I was actually headed to Marion to get with more crews that were coming in, and I got on 40 and I made it all the way to Swannanoa, and that's when the interstate washed out. So we sat in traffic there for who knows how long till we finally got turned around and headed back towards Hendersonville. Then during all this is when the trees and water starts rising, and ended up getting stuck on exit 44. And once we got off the highway, you couldn't go anywhere, and then water crested the interstate where we just come from. So it was just shut down for, I don't remember, 4 hours maybe, until finally we were able to get back, actually head back towards Asheville. I couldn't even make it back to my service territory. But yeah, it was total chaos. You had people, phones were down, nobody could communicate with anybody. You just, trying to get through the day.
When we first started storm duty, we started on 16s, and I want to say it was around 28 to 31 days straight of 16-hour work days. Sometimes they consisted a little bit more of the 16-hour days just because of the areas we were working and getting in and out of them and getting back out. It was just too much of trying to get in and get back out in a matter of 16 hours. So some of those turned into 18-hour days. But it was consistently 16-hour days for at least 30, 31 days straight. The biggest problem, though, that I could remember and just having to deal with was all the trees down in the roads where it would normally take 5 minutes to get to. You were looking at getting around 30 to 25 minutes to a normal drive just trying to navigate roads that were open just because of the trees that were down. And the devastation was so bad, whenever we all gathered up and started working, you started at the substation. There was nothing, we didn't even have substations on. I don't think there's a single substation on out of our op center that we was working out of in Hendersonville. So we just started at substations and started cleaning the lines off, getting them prepared for, crews to start coming in and getting the lines up to where they could even get their trucks in. So the first part of it was just getting the roads opened up and trees off the lines. I don't even think we seen a DOT truck for maybe the first 3 or 4 days. We was there ourselves getting the trees off the road and making it accessible for our contractors and all the other Duke linemen and help to, where we could utilize them and put them to work.
And then where did you all sleep, and how did you arrange meals for all the line workers that were out on the storm?
So we were actually talking about that before we got on this with you, which we were all lucky. We all were able to go and sleep at home. Now, we didn't have power there, and it was camping, but we were able to make it home because we were obviously working local. But the meal thing was very challenging because, like Jordan said, we had essentially zero power on. I know out of the operations center that I work out of, we had like 400 customers that had power out of the whole center, and that encompasses multiple counties. Like Jordan said, we started at these substations, and we were trying to work out. Well, none of the restaurants had power. Nobody had power. So for me, I actually had a friend who owns a barbecue restaurant, and on day 2, I went to him and asked, is there any way you could feed us? And he actually set his food truck up because he could run it off propane. And in my area, I had about 200, 210 people that I was kind of overseeing for the storm. And he ended up feeding our whole group for, I think, 2 weeks with no power. And it was stories like that all over. I mean, like my wife included, her and my children were actually going to that food truck every day, packaging meals. And a lot of other people in the community were doing that also. And I know I've heard stories of a lot of different linemen, their wives. They were making sandwiches and just trying to prepare meals for people because there was just nothing available. All the lights were out, and most of the restaurants, their food spoiled before they could even use it. So it was just kind of get what you could get and keep working.
Going back to the food situation, I think the first 2 or 3 days, the 7 guys that I was working with, we was living off of water and beef jerky bags before we could actually start getting some food. But the first thing that comes to mind on that is kind of like Miles was saying, the people that come together, as far as linemen's wives and everybody that ended up packing up sandwiches and using their own food that they had at their homes to bring to us or get together and get to us is what comes to mind, and what ended up happening there in the beginning before we could start getting some of these restaurants opened up. And once we got some of these restaurants opened up, they opened arms to all the linemen to start eating. But there in the beginning, it was definitely a line wife community there, making sandwiches and getting them distributed out to us, which is very nice of them. And the community too. Going back to just a line that was on, I can remember being down in Big Hungry, and it was all we had back there was a UTV and a track machine. There wasn't getting no trucks in and out. And the community back there, they couldn't get no lunches to us, and the community ended up making some sandwiches for the 8 or 9 guys that was back there and getting them to us. So that was cool. Just stuff like that. That's how we ended up eating.
Yeah, and before I pass this to Heath, I will say too, I know one day that there was a farmer come through, and most of their crop had been destroyed, their apple farmer, and they had a whole bed of their truck just filled with apples. They'd bagged them up, and they come to our staging area and give us like 300 bags of apples. And so we literally ate apples for days, and some days that was the only thing we really got. So it was just stuff like that everybody pulled together.
Yeah, I know locally in our op center, we worked our poor office ladies to death because they were taking any kind of food they could find, trying to prepare meals to give out. Because when you're feeding, hundreds or thousands of people and nothing's open, that's tough. And I bet they worked all day just to keep people somewhat fed. And eventually they got to where they were bringing food trucks in, and they would come into our op centers and they would set up. And there was food going all the time to feed our people working out of Hendersonville.
Those are some amazing stories. And I know you 3 worked some really long hours, but What was it like for you to be able to go home to your families every night? And what was it like returning to a house that had no power?
Well, I mean, it was awesome, which we didn't really get to see them because, like I said, 16, 18, sometimes they were 20-hour days for me. So by the time I got there, my family was asleep. It might be go in and kiss the kids, and they probably didn't even know I was there, but I just briefly got to see them. But thankfully, I had a generator at my house, so I would at least get to go in, fire the generator up, and take a shower. So that was really good compared to a lot of other people I heard about.
And then for those out-of-town crews who weren't local, where did they stay during the storm?
Yeah, we had several staging areas kind of scattered out geographically to support each op center. And then we had little miniature staging areas for day-to-day work. So we had the larger staging areas where the trucks would be parked and where we had fuel. And then when we would split off and go to our little smaller geographical areas, we had smaller staging areas set up just for day-to-day operations. And those were all over the county, anywhere we could find a parking lot big enough to park 50, 100, how many ever trucks.
We turned our substation that they turned us loose on, our substation, we just converted it to our own staging area. And the guys that were helping me, I had a couple guys running with me. We would bring material every day. We got dumpsters, porta-johns there, and we were fortunate enough to have a pretty good-sized parking lot outside of the station that I was working, so we didn't have to really come into the op centers. It was pretty congested, so we was pretty fortunate with that, but more or less build your own staging area was the ticket.
I tell you what the most difficult thing was getting staged up is not having any cell phone service. I think there was 4 or 5, maybe more days where nobody had any cell phone service. Radios didn't have to work. So you kind of, went back to the old days where you didn't have nothing. You got done at the end of the day is like, hey, in the morning we're meeting back at this location. You better be there. If you're not, we're going to come looking for you at your hotel or wherever at your house because you couldn't talk to nobody. So it made it pretty difficult and stressing there for a little bit, trying to get everybody staged up and keep them together, and the directions, everybody relies on, their maps on their phones and everything else. I had a little atlas map at home that, I'm a big camper. We go camping all the time. I just had one to ride down the road looking every now and then. And I ended up giving it to somebody else that's from out of town just so they could get their crews around, just stuff like that comes to mind.
Yeah, that was a big deal with the communication. And essentially, everybody we had here supporting were from out of town, way out of town. I mean, we had people from all over the country. And with no GPS, it was a nightmare just to give everybody directions.
Stay tuned to part 2 of this series on Hurricane Helene 1 year later to hear more about the damage and destruction caused by the hurricane. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Line Life podcast produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. Be sure to subscribe or follow the Line Life podcast in your favorite podcasting app so new episodes will be delivered straight to you. For more insights, you can visit our website at tdworld.com/podcasts or linelife.podbean.com. You can also connect with us by following us on Instagram at Lineman World or on Facebook, LinkedIn, or X. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Line Life Podcast.